Zachary Taylor. The Taylor administration was one of the new prospects with old trends. Taylor valued the preservation of the Union, safeguarded by those before him, but was also faced with the expansion of his country. The dilemma over California and New Mexico statehood bred haggard congressmen. Taylor met the slavery issue in these new territories in the hands of the people, popular sovereignty. Slavery, still widespread in the boiling South, was not being spread into the West. The South, threatened by this, vowed secession. Taylor shut down these claims with promised military action. Such action never came, and neither did secession.
Millard Fillmore. Fillmore's decision in the Compromise of 1850 and the passage of Douglas's Kansas-Nebraska Act led to the effects that bloodied President Fillmore's term. Such violent uprising as Bloody Kansas and the riots over the Fugitive Slave Act could not be settled by Fillmore's dearly held virtue of compromising, but rather quieted down until a more opportune moment. Ironically, Fillmore valued the unpopular idea of equality, something that slavery had shoved under the mat since the time of Jefferson's presidency.
Franklin Pierce. The promised Democratic success, Pierce set forth his administration for the prerogatives of his party. The Gadsden Purchase, although thought to be useless, proved Pierce's expansionistic goals. Unfortunately for the Democratic Party, slavery was as unnecessary in the West as a screen door on a submarine. When pro-slavery Southerners saw there was no gain to be had in the West, they turned for further exploration into the Caribbean. The Ostend Manifesto was as close as Pierce would get to gaining Cuba. His once proud goal of spreading slavery failed.
James Buchanan. The Panic of 1857 led President Buchanan to his belief in economic reform. Beyond his economic policy, Buchanan had no other new ideals. The Dred Scott case made history for a complete lack of social equality. Even in the new age of the American economy, African Americans were still denied citizenship. John Brown's gory revolt let the world know that if change could not be found soon, it would be found in the veins of those who stood in the way of progress. The winds of change were changing. War was on the horizon. Abraham Lincoln, the 16th President of these United States, was arguably the first to truly believe in equality for all men. From the very beginning, with his inaugural address, Lincoln firmly told the people that he would not instigate war, and if they wanted bloodshed, they would have to spill it themselves. The president highly valued unity, and would regrettably see what no president had seen before, a complete division of his country. When the tension finally broke, the president negotiated in the North's interest and what would gain Northern victory, rather than the immediate downfall of slavery. To keep the border states from succeeding, Lincoln did not, in fact, preach the removal of slavery. He would, however, free slaves with the Emancipation Proclamation. When the war was won, slavery was completely outlawed. Lincoln had gained in blood what nearly every president before him had tried to win in ink, proving history correct in saying that reform only comes at musket point. Andrew Johnson. Johnson was left with the country in near ruin. With Lincoln buried, the new president took it upon himself to continue his predecessor's beliefs in the form of the Reconstruction Act. He continued to follow Lincoln's policies, even as far as the passage of the 13th Amendment. The 17th president continued with readmission of the South, a business both tricky and highly debated over. However, Johnson could not hide in Lincoln's tall shadow forever. His actions in dismissing his Secretary of State led to an attempt at impeachment, as this was a direct violation of recent legislation. Try as he might, Andrew was no Abraham, and left many wishing for a restoration of their beloved Lincoln. Unfortunately, zombies do not make good leaders. Ulysses S. Grant. Reconstruction was still in the air as War General Grant took office. Grant kept the policies of the men whom he had served in the Civil War alive. He continued to aid the nation, currently securing through the Panic of 1873, with the resumption of Specie Act. The Treaty of Washington allotted Grant to continue his successful Reconstruction. Beyond this Lincoln-esque building, Grant was a military man at heart, and left no lasting impression upon the diplomats of Washington. Rutherford B. Hayes. Hayes ended Reconstruction by finally removing the last of the Union's troops from the South. He immediately tackled the inflation caused by the Bland-Allison Act, which he opposed from the beginning. He valued a strong currency for a strong nation, finally reunited from the Civil War. Hayes turned his eyes from the settling torrent of the South to the western frontier. He passed the Chinese Treaty of 1880, a point of debate in gold miners and Californians. Chester A. Arthur. Arthur, besides being the infamous man with two first names, focused his platform on infrastructure. He created the modern Navy, boosting the maritime security of America. The Harbor and River Act, the first Environmental Improvement Act, soon followed. Economically, the mongrel tariff was enacted to continue this trend of reform. The shadow of war was no longer cast over the nations, and for the first time in nearly 3 presidential terms. Grover Cleveland. President Cleveland left actions in place that showed his desire for order and protection in case of a catastrophe, such as the death of a president. He left in his wake the Presidential Succession Act, letting the fall of power in the event of the deaths of both the president and the vice president. Cleveland vetoed the Pension Act originally, but it would later pass in Harrison's presidency. The 21st president met the caboozles of monopolies growing within the states with the Commerce Act. Continuing with the regulation of train service, Cleveland strongly pushed infrastructure as well as civil service reform.